Ray Dalio. If you clicked on this video, you have likely watched some of his other clips from earlier this year where he highlights and hints at certain conditions in the market, suggesting that a massive and dangerous asset bubble is forming as we speak. But nearly 6 months later, much of what he was hinting at has turned out to be false, at least presently speaking. Stocks have risen at record-breaking pace. The S&P 500 is up nearly 16% in 2021, and we're only halfway through the year. If it is a bubble, it has only gotten bigger. So the big question on everyone's mind, how long can this go? At what point does a bubble get redefined as a bull market? For many of us, waiting months, possibly years on the sidelines doesn't make sense, especially watching neighbors and friends profit as you sit on the bench calling for an apocalypse. In today's video, we look at exactly that. What is Dalio saying now in July of 2021? A recent interview published only days ago helps us understand his thoughts and answers many of the questions I just referenced. The interview starts off right away with the topic of inflation.
There are different kinds of inflation. I'm not particularly worried about the classic supply, demand pressing up against supply, although we'll find out soon because there's something like 10% of GDP stored in financial assets that's going to be coming out. And so it's likely that there's going to be a big pickup in demand, and that will probably raise prices significantly. And it also depends how you count for inflation, because like housing prices themselves are going up a lot, but rental prices are going down a lot. The big things I think are, and if you went to a 3% inflation rate or some bounce, that's not one of those things that gets me very nervous or very excited. The real issue.
Now, before I reveal the big things he's talking about, I need you to understand two really important comments he just said. Let me repeat it. Ray is not worried about supply-demand inflation. This is what we've been largely seeing with housing prices, commodities, and various other items that have caused a surge in news headlines regarding the invisible tax. Take for an example housing inventory, which is essentially supply. It has gone off a cliff with demand remaining high. That is the classic economics lesson you learned in high school. Lower the supply and keep demand the same or higher, and you'll see a bump in prices. This type of inflation, Dalio dismisses as no big deal. Now, the second thing I need you to understand is the importance of hitting that subscribe button and like button if you're enjoying the video. Now we can get back to the important piece. The type of inflation that has them really worried. Take a listen.
The real issue is that we have a supply-demand issue of bonds, because we're going to have to sell a lot of bonds to those in the world who own bond inventories. And they have very low interest rates, negative real interest rates, and they're overweighted in U.S. bonds, and they're going to have to buy a lot more. And that is also coming at a time when Chinese capital markets, other capital markets are becoming more attractive. That creates a supply-demand issue that can create a monetary inflation, because there will not be enough demand to buy those bonds. And that means that it's likely that the Federal Reserve will not be able to taper or cut back, and might actually have to increase to prevent interest rates from going up. And that's a classic monetary inflation. So that's my bigger concern than just the spurt. I think for most of the world, the real question is, what are interest rates relative to inflation, and also what is happening with all this liquidity, because there's a huge amount of liquidity and negative real interest rates. And that means that it pays not to own any debt instruments. That pays not to own cash, certainly not cash.
So that may have sounded confusing and maybe even boring, but what Dalio is suggesting is quite scary when put into the proper frame. Remember, this is a billionaire. This is a guy who ran the world's largest hedge fund. These are the types of people that are usually quiet or choose their words very carefully when speaking about their future market opinion, especially if they're bearish. So to hear him say, quote, "Nobody is buying US bonds," is pretty shocking. This phrase is actually very important. US bonds act as a major catalyst in the world of finance. If his statement is true, well then the naturally occurring forces in the market will force inflation to rise. You see, when you have negative returns via bonds and inflation higher than 3%, you are openly being pushed by the government to buy hard assets and avoid cash and savings. This in turn will ultimately cause inflation in various other sectors. This could also explain why we're seeing giant institutions buy up large swaths of housing, overpaying for each and every one. The tables have turned. Debt is so cheap. With interest rates being this low, they are betting they could easily see amazing returns holding on to assets like residential housing for the long term. Money is just being thrown around. Take for an example interest-only mortgages. These are crazy offers that allow a consumer or borrower in this case to take out a mortgage and pay only the interest for the first few years. This one right here, offered by Rocket Mortgage, allows a person to buy a $300,000 house and for the first 5 years only pay around $875 a month. After those 5 years are up, the monthly payments increase significantly. However, to many people, this is an invitation to buy up a house or houses, speculating on a rapid rise in price, only for the same person to dump it on the market before the 5 years are up. It's leveraging on steroids. And instruments like these are fueling speculation and causing prices to rapidly go upwards in markets around the United States. These special types of loans are just one tiny example of a greater economy that has been turned into a bubble where savers are punished and borrowing while speculating is easy and profitable. Many are crying out that the bubble is set to implode at any minute, but figuring out the timing is nearly impossible. The catalyst that brings down the market is often unexpected and unseen. But much of what is happening right now looks very, very greedy and eerily similar to other massive bubbles we have seen in the past, like 2008. As always, thank you guys for watching, and please make sure you hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed. I had to keep this week's video a bit short, but as August comes around, you can expect longer and higher quality videos going forward.